Hello, my name is Roman Djindjihashvili, and this video is about importance of a pawn structure, something we already had, but in completely different aspect. We talk about going for worse pawn structure in exchange for some other benefits in position, such as maybe kingside attack, queenside attack, or maybe for some other dynamic activities. So we are not going to be touching the material subject. So like not getting pawn structure for a piece, for extra pawn, but strictly based on position. So sometimes you do want to go for attack. You want to attack your opponent. But it doesn't always happen that you can do that without making any damages in your position. And sometimes you create weaknesses, maybe even sacrifice a pawn. But we're going to be talking about when is it worth to making sacrifice in a pawn structure to get some other positional advantages. So first I want to bring you several games when one side has some positional deficit in a form of a pawn structure, and what do they get for it. And I want to start with a couple of examples of exact same pawn structure, exact same opening, and two absolutely conflicting results. And you see how one tiny move order can make huge difference. We're talking about accelerated Draken, something I covered many times before. Knight f3, g6, d4, one of the main positions of accelerated Draken. Bishop g7, bishop e3, knight f6, bishop c4, queen a5. And again, I want to mention, I'm not going to go into details of theoretical discussions. No. We talk about, you should concentrate on this video strictly on the pawn structure. d6, h3, and now bishop d7, queen d3 is one of the main moves, rook fc8, and this position happened multiple times. I want you to see a difference between move a3 and the rook fe1. Now, it looks like it shouldn't be big difference between these. a3 is a good, useful move to stop in the future black knight going to b4, or maybe even after a6 and b5 black plays to stop b4. So in general, it's a useful move. But here you're going to see a huge difference between them. Now, black can go knight e5, and after queen e2, black will make the best move in this position. Actually, I played this position a couple of times myself. That move that looks like disastrous, terrible move, highly anti-positional, and absolutely unsound. Queen a6 move. And you see this pawn structure. It looks terrible for black. But in reality, this is a good position for black. In fact, it's very good position for black. Actually, I think black has some advantage. Now, how can this double A pawn, okay, it's not just double pawn, it's a double pawn on the A file, which makes it even worse, and totally isolated. That means no other pawn on B file. So it looks like this pawn's doomed, and position looks horrible for black. What does black have here? Black have great dynamics of play, such as rook b8, knight c4, and maybe even pushing A pawns. They have kind of attack on the counterplay on C and B files, which fully compensate structural damage. Now, white, on the other hand, if they manage harmlessly to exchange pieces, they're going to have big, maybe winning positional advantage. So how should we evaluate this position? Queen takes a6, b8, and now probably the best move, rook f to d1. You need the A rook to maybe protect the b2 pawn, which you will see why. Okay, after rook f to d1, knight c4. Now, the best move is bishop takes c4, rook takes c4. I want you to see why black has tremendous compensation. Rook a to b1. Now, knight b3 is not possible because e4 pawn is hanging. So, rook a to b1, white 100% safe because those pawns are not under immediate danger. But what black has here, they have long time pressure. And for example, the exchange sacrifice here is not very good for black because white will have an advantage here. Rook c7 and eventually their knight b3, and black does not have enough compensation for exchange. But they are not intending to, so rook b8. And now white wants to prepare to go knight b3, so they protect the e4 pawn by playing f3. Now we want to retreat that rook from c4. It's done its job. Rook c7. We are planning to double rooks on b file. And after rook c7, knight b3. Those are the best defensive moves for white. We cannot go through every move because position, it doesn't have concrete character of the position. There is no concrete threats to white. So this is like a covering the b file, opening bishop and rook, and in general, this is a move that makes a lot of sense. Bishop e6. Now, suppose knight d4, and should black go back bishop d7? No, because black has an advantage here, and the move is knight d7. Now, after knight d7, black is going knight e5 and knight c4. Knight takes e6, f takes e, and bishop d2. Black suffered more damages to their pawn structure as their advantage increased. Now, this is really a bad position for white. Now, you see, we have, of course, the double e pawn is not nearly as bad as double a pawn because double e pawn is a part of a e7, e6, and d6 pawns, so they may work together. But double a pawn has almost no explanation except for a great dynamic play that pays off for black. After bishop d2, black has very big advantage by playing knight b6. Knight is going to c4, and white cannot stop it because b3 cannot be played because knight on c3 is hanging. That's why we didn't play knight e5, because white may go b3. Bishop is blocked on g7. So we go knight b6. Now suppose king f2. Now we go knight c4. And you see we start creeping up on white queenside pawns. After knight c4, knight a4, protecting everything. It looks like they're still safe. Knight a4, but now we go rook c to b7. Attacking b2 pawn, which cannot be protected, and b3 cannot be pushed because of knight takes a3. So after rook b7, c3, and now black has a comfortable choice. You see, white couldn't manage to defend queenside pawns. And actually, I looked at this variation in many different ways. There is no way to defend successfully the queenside. Although the queens are off the board, and still the counterplay and dynamics of the pieces are overwhelming. Now black can go knight takes b2, they can play knight takes a3 and have an advantage, but rook b3 is the best move, maintaining all those threats and also isolating completely knight on b3. Now there may be a possibility of playing rook b5 followed by rook a5 and winning the knights. All black's pieces completely dominating here, and there is a result of bad double pawn on a file. Piece dynamics and play make this position very, very powerful for black. But originally, once we got this position, we just exchanged queens. And it does look like white should be able to defend their queen side, and white should be okay, but they couldn't make it. Now let's look at the same position with a slight difference. Here, queen d3, rook c8, and now suppose rook f to e1. Knight e5, queen e2, and queen a6. Queen takes a6, b takes a, and you'll see the same position. Instead of a3, white played rook f to e1. That's a dramatic difference. Well, as I said, this was close, the last game we saw. The position was close for evaluations, and it was very hard to determine who really was better until it came too obvious. Well, in this position, I don't know if black can play any better than the game was played. However, they didn't do that well. Now, after exchange of queens, white plays rook a to d1, knight c4, and bishop c1. Rook a to b8, and here white plays very, very powerful move. This is the powerful move that it's not easy to see, but that shows that if white simplifies position, that's what I mentioned, then they will have an advantage, and move is e5. That's very powerful move, because now black must take on e5. They must take it with a pawn. Taking with the knight is going to give them very difficult game because rook is going to take on e7 next move. Even after knight c6, knight takes and rook takes e7. White has big advantage now because f7 is a weakness and black didn't do anything, didn't activate its pieces enough to justify weaknesses on a file. So this timely shot e5 makes position in white's favor. He takes c, knight f3. White will get the e5 pawn back. After e6, bishop takes c4, rook takes c4, knight takes e5, rook c7, has to be protected, and now knight e4. You see, weakening the bishop on d7. And after knight to e4, knight takes e4, knight takes d7, rook d8, and if rook takes e4, so what has happened in this game? White managed immediate activity in its center to distract black from getting quick counterplay on the queen side, because it was just a matter of one tempo, and now white has some advantage. Rook check doesn't bring any results because simply rook e1, and white is better. Winning, I don't know if white is winning, but white has an advantage. So what's the conclusion based on these two games we just looked? Actually, it's more like high-level analysis, more like than a game. So conclusion is this. In the position where black went for pawn damage here, this looks very double-edged. It's like when you start attack on the opposite sides. It's very close. The side that plays better gonna come up on top, unless there is a position where one has huge advantage. Black has legitimate hopes for a counterplay on queen side. White has opportunity to, in the game, rook d1 and rook b8, and then just the way we looked at this game. And side that plays better wins. So when you go for the position, how should you assess whether these double pawns are worth getting or not? You see, if you have legitimate play, you can go for it. And then with the best play, you may get an advantage or some disadvantage. And this how you're going to get experience, because there is no clear way of getting assessment of the position in the very early stage. Of course, there are positions where we're going to create ourselves bone structural damage, and it's going to be very bad and very good, and you can see it right away. This position is sophisticated, and it looks very close. That's why every tempo is very, very important. And that's why it's so difficult to make an assessment. What happened in this game actually is this e5 move. Now question is, maybe black shouldn't play this way they played, But then you're going to go and search for different continuation, maybe with delaying on knight c4, maybe in this position actually, black played knight c4 first. Another option is to go maybe a5, an a5 move that makes sense, because what do we want to do after a5? We are, in a way, we are threatening a4, and after we deflect this both pieces, knight and bishop, we can take pawn on e4. Position is double-edged, and what I am trying to say, something that may look to you absolutely horrible, this pawn structure. Whether rook is on f1 and pawn on a3, or rook on e1, pawn on a2. It looks horrible no matter which way you look at it. And that's what I'm trying to say. It's not horrible. It's very double-edged, and that's where it's worth to get this terrible pawn structure for good activity of the pieces. It's same like maybe like sacrificing the pawn for these open two files. And the exception is that a pawn may be a very important factor in these types of positions. This is something to explore, something to go deeper, but it's very essential to know that not all pawn damages are critical, pawn structure damages.